Right then, folks, we are now at a stage where we've tracked our footage. We've then solved that footage to triangulate the distances, the heights, the widths of the environment we see in camera. We've then reconstructed the world in front of the camera using that solved data. We've then added some ground planes just to check that everything's sticking with some random proxy objects. We've then deleted those objects out once we're happy, and we've added some lighting probes into the environment. And these are simply spheres with a glossy texture or a glossy material and a matte grey material. And that's so we can see different types of surface in this one lighting condition. We've then used a high dynamic range image or HDRI environment image to light our scene rather than using a simple light. And we've looked at how we can map, rotate, locate that background image so it best aligns and matches that which is seen in the camera. And we've also saturated it and exposed it and given it the right strength to match what we see in front of us. To the point now that we've got this fairly realistic interpretation of the shot we see in front of us, and our CG objects, no matter how random, look like they're part of the scene. So we're now comfortable in the knowledge that if we drop these random sci-fi parts and objects into this environment, as we bring them in, they should be lit perfectly by this environment that sits around them in the 3D world. We don't have to do anything else, but just bring them in, line them up, and start to build our scene and be creative. So how do we bring objects into the scene? Well, let me go to the layout view, our standard view. And I'm also going to go back to how we did before. So I'm going to change this bottom window from shading to back to timeline. So if we look across, look, you've got different options. And in animation, I've got timeline. I'm going to go up to here, look, and just bring this a bit smaller. We don't need our timeline to be that big. And that just gives us a bit more real estate to be doing our 3D work. So how do we bring objects in? So you can be quite brutal at this point and simply select your sphere, press delete, select your sphere, press delete, because we no longer need them. There we go. So they're gone. So all we're left with is our ground planes and our camera. Dead easy. So let's now bring some objects in. So how do we import objects into here that already exist somewhere else? Well, we're not actually going to import them in. The word that we're going to use is append, which is a kind of, I suppose, a catch-all term for add into. Yeah. So what we're going to do is we're going to go File, Append, and you're going to navigate to, again, the folder I've given you. So let's navigate to that folder once more. And I need to make sure I go to the correct folder. Yours is dead easy because it's just simply the one you've downloaded for me. I'm going to come to here, Assets, Textured 3D Meshes. And we can say, with the Adobe Spark next to us, we could say, right, which one do we want to load in? I want to load in. So let's say, for example, I've got the Adobe Spark page next to me. Look, it's got all the things in it. And you can say, right, I am going to load in. First off, let's think about what I'm going to load in. Let's try quite a large object that I'm going to place in the center. This is going to be my hero object, as it were. So what I could do is look through these, look and find not only which category it's in, but which number it is, look. So let's go. I'm going to load that one there. So plate, it's in plates, and it's plate 008. Okay, good. Let's go back to Blender. Let's go down to where it says plates, look, .blend, and it'll open up these folders. We then want to get one of the objects out of that folder. So you go Object, and I want the object called Plate 8. It's append from library, and it'll load it in, look. And if we've got rendered on the viewpoint shading, it might take just a minute just to load in all the textures. But if you have it in solid view up here, it's a much quicker way of working when lining things up with things that have complex textures. So it is, look, I can S to scale it. I can come to the rotate tool, look, and I can rotate it. If I use the white from the view that I'm looking at, from the angle I'm looking at, I can use red, green, just to rotate it. I can use it, also press 1 on my keyboard just to get a more orthographic view. Then press 3 to look at it from a different angle, look. Just to get it level with the floor. Then I can then just drag this over to the origin point of my world, press 0, and it's somewhere in the middle. But it just needs to go back in that axis. So I've just pressed 1, look, to center it not only on the red, but on the blue. Press 0, and there it is in the middle, look. Great. What does it look like when it's rendered? Lit by our environment map. Let's go to rendered view. And there you go. We've got our first textured object in there. Let's carry on. Let's go back to the Adobe Spark page and let's think, what else do we want in here? Let's have something else that's got a bit of visual interest. So it might be that you got to think about the logic of the scene. So I want, this is a base. So let's maybe make it a bit larger. They scale, I've done these textures at very high resolution, so they scale very well. So I'm just going to penetrate the floor slightly. So they do scale well. You haven't got to worry about the textures kind of breaking down. Okay. So then what I'm going to do is I'm going to come in here. I'm maybe going to use this as a secondary piece on top to transition into this taller element here. Okay. So turbine 1 and 2, 1 and 3. So I'm going to go 3 first. So let's go File, Append, but I'm just going to go to solid shading just to speed up our lives a bit. File, Append. And it was in turbines, object 3, penned in, look, there it is. Let's go to 1 on the keyboard. I'm just going to rotate it a bit. Ooh, on that axis, and on this axis. Then I'm going to move it into position. Trying to center it in the middle of this platform. I haven't quite rotated it enough. There we go. A slight bit of imperfection can go a long way, actually. So let's look at it from a different view. I'm going to press 3. I can see, look here, it was centered on one axis, but not on another. There we go. So if I press 1 and 3, look, I can see that it's pretty centered. Let's go to 0. There you go. And maybe it just needs to go down into the center of that a bit. If I press into the 3D world, look, I can look at it from a 3D angle. Maybe it's just a bit too large. So let's scale it. Okay. And let's go back to 1. Because once I've scaled it, it would actually have come up a bit. Let's go into my 3D world. So it's just kind of using all the different controls available to you, look, just to make sure everything's just sitting on top of one another in a good fashion. There we go. Looks pretty centered to me. Yep, that'll do me. Let's say a little bit of imperfection goes a long way. Let's look at it in the rendered view. And you can see it's coming with a different texture, the texture you saw in the image that you chose it from. So a bit of nice complementary color. We've got kind of pale grays and oranges with the patterning on the gray, and then we've got this blue and steel coming through. So there's a bit of color variation. And this has got a different reflective quality to this very matte surface. So it's quite nice to see in this environment. And I think it was turbine 1 again that we were going to get. Yeah, turbine 1. Let's go File, Append. It's still inside the turbines project yet. Look where it last was. Turbine 1, append from library. Again, because I left it on rendered view, it might just take a minute just to load all the textures in again. But if you want a quicker life, just make sure you go to solid view every time you move into a different model. Again, let's go to 1 on my keypad. Now I'm going to rotate it on the, I want it to flip. So I'm going to rotate it on this green y-axis 180 degrees, look. So if I go R on the keyboard, so I'm rotating, then press Y to rotate it only on the Y, then press 180 degrees and press enter. It's then rotated at 180 degrees. Press my 1 key again. I'm going to bring it up, look. Oh, look, it fits in there perfectly. Let's plonk that on there. 3 to see it from the other angle. And then just drop it downwards just so it sits inside that second model. Like so. Fandabidozy. Let's look at it from this view and let's look at it rendered. And you can see, look, the holes as well, so you can see the environment behind, which is a nice touch. There we go. We're creating this kind of monolithic kind of structure using these kit pieces. So if we were to press render image right now, we'd see what this looked like. Now, because we've loaded images with complex shaders, look, can you see it's taken a little bit longer to load in before it starts rendering? And that's because we have all that complexity now. It's loading all the images that are making up these shaders. So basically we've put up our rendering times a bit, because the more models you have with more textures, the longer it takes just to populate those before it actually starts rendering the image and the scene. So every time we add a model with its textures, we're basically adding to our render time slightly. There we go. It's starting to sit within the scene quite comfortably, look. So we're getting there, gradually building up this scene. Now it looks a bit random, and this is where you kind of, your sense of story needs to kind of take hold. You got to think, actually, what do I want this to, you know, what's feeding this object? What's it doing? Is it transferring power in? Does it need to be powered? Is it transferring things from one to another? Is it coming from another place? You might want to put other kind of barriers and functions or pipes around it. This is where you can start to add your story. So I'll just repeat just to show you one more, and then but I don't want to dictate too much how you might approach this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go File, Append. I'm going to come to a different section now. Let's go with stands maybe. Let's go Object. Which stand do I want? Let's go back one. Let's go. That looks quite cool because it's got a bit of visual interest. Let's go stand 4. So let's go to stand 4. Append from library. Again, because I left it in rendered view, it's going to take a little while to just populate through. There we are. And these can be as big or as small as you want them to be. So I could, for example, scale this right down and have this as a piece on the side of this. Oh, I've pressed wireframe view. So let's go to 1 look. Let's bring this in. 3. Let's bring it down a bit. Let's bring it along a bit. 1. You can see I've kind of crashed it into the geometry a bit. Let's just rotate it around on the Z-axis, and then we can kind of get hold of it here. Look, so it's a bit of a tricky alignment. You can basically see what we're doing. We're adding a different, so we're actually amending this piece by just adding this tiny bit of almost furniture to this section, and you can then Shift D and duplicate that. So what was a big stand is now becoming a little piece of furniture on what was a smaller object. So there's so many different permeations that you can give this look to give it life. The other alternative would be I could Shift D to duplicate that, X to keep it on the X-axis. I could create another one on here at that same scale, or I could R to rotate on the X by pressing X 90 degrees. Well, let's rotate again. Rotate X 180 degrees. Confirm. Scale it up. And because these textures are very scalable, like I said before, it could become a much larger piece. Oh, let's put the move arrow on. Make sure it's crashed into the floor slightly. It's over here, and it can be a much larger piece. So you can use these any way you want. Fairly large, fairly small. You know, it's down to your creativity of how you want to kind of add visual interest, visual detail to these things. Now, these are crying out for pipes to be connected into them as well. Now, I've given you obviously a pipes and wires, lots of models and meshes, but in the next video, I'm going to show you how you can create some quick custom cables or wires inside Blender itself, which is your first kind of bit of modeling, but it's a really good way of adding a bit of additional detail. So thank you.